I'm Sherry with Liberty Mission Farms, and we've decided to put together a series of videos on gardening, organic gardening in particular. We have had so many questions come to us, especially recently because of what's going on in the world, but also because it's spring, and in Missouri this is a good time to start seeds. And over the years we've sold starter plants to our customers, both locally and in the city that's a couple hours from us. And over they say to us, how are you doing your plants, because the plants we get from you are so much stronger and healthier and produce so much more than those that we get at the local box store or at the local garden store. And we think one of the reasons for that is the seed starter soil mix that we mix. We didn't create this idea. This came from Eliot Coleman, who, if you're not familiar with him, is an organic gardener. He's written a lot of books, which we highly recommend. But if you don't have time to read a whole book, this will give you the start on how he does his soil blocking. We're going to talk a little bit about soil blocking and what that is, and the soil that we use. So, this is new for us. We're used to being behind the camera instead of in front of it, but I think doing this in front of the camera gives everyone a chance to kind of see how it works, and that's a little bit easier than just reading about it. So, here we go. I have a lot of the ingredients here that we need, and don't think that you have to write them all down, because at the end of the video I'll post the recipe for it, and then I'll also post some alternatives, because as I go through it you might think, well, I don't have access to that, or I don't know where to get that. We'll help you with all that. We'll post it on our website so you can get access to all that you need to make this, and some good alternatives if you don't have access to something that we're using here. So, to get started, let's start with the soil. The first part of this recipe, it has to have a lot of peat in it. And if you've ever worked with peat moss, that's easy to find at Lowe's and other box stores like that. If you work with peat moss, it's kind of like working with flour. It kind of poofs everywhere. It's hard to work with, so I always get it wet. So the peat moss I have in here, I've wetted it down with some of our rainwater from our rain barrels, and I've kind of worked with it and gotten it wet. So I don't know if you can kind of see now, but before it was just kind of a lot of dust floating everywhere and gets in your eyes and gets everywhere. So that's the first ingredient, is the peat moss. And again, I'll talk about the amounts in just at the end of the video. The second thing you add is garden lime. Just a little bit of garden lime. It looks like little rocks. It kind of is little rocks, but the lime is going to help bring some air into the soil and into the roots, and you don't need very much of it, so I'm going to add this lime. And I always do the peat moss and the lime together and mix it in first. That way you're going to get the best result of having everything really, really well mixed. This tray that I'm using, we got as a gift actually when we bought our larger greenhouse. I'm in our smaller greenhouse today because the weather has not been agreeable, so I decided to just set up here in the greenhouse so it's a little bit nicer in here. But anyway, this tray is very handy. You could use a bucket or anything else, but a tray like this is nice, and you can probably find these at local garden stores as well. But you want it nice and wet and mixed in pretty good. After that, then we're going to add some type of coarse sand or perlite. So an example of that would be, this is one brand we use. This is perlite, and if you look at this, it is almost looks like, it's like light little, just almost looks like styrofoam that's been crumbled. And this is just going to add air. You can use this, or you can use this vermiculite. Oh, you can say it right. Vermiculite. I think that's how you say it. But this is what we use for our sand mix as well. So I'm not measuring exactly here. I'm looking at my recipe. I'm doing a smaller than normal batch. We usually do really large batches of this. But I'm going to add some of this. But you need to have good air getting into the mix. So I'm going to add that. And I'm going to mix that in a little bit. Then we're going to need compost. And we'll talk more about compost in another video. We make our own compost. If you are not, and we'll do a whole series on making your own compost as well. That's our plan. But if you aren't able to make your compost, or you need to get something right away, there's a lot of alternatives at the stores that you can get. And again, we'll put that at the end of the video. But we're going to use our compost that we've gotten here, and we've just kind of sifted it out, any big chunks that might have been left. So I'm going to mix that right in. So that's the compost. And the last ingredient is going to be some garden soil or some topsoil. And we've got some garden soil here. And this we've just purchased at, I think at Lowe's. You can get some pretty good garden soil. We're going to mix that in as well. Put garden soil in there. Now I'm going to just kind of get this a little bit wet. It's kind of like making mud pies for adults. Doing this, okay. Now another thing that's nice to add in is a good base fertilizer of some type, and you can get any fertilizer that it'll say 4-4-4. It's a balance of different ingredients. We use and make our own mix, and we use these three things. It's a mixture of blood meal and this garden phosphate, and Greensand. This is a wonderful thing, Greensand, but this is the thing that you'll probably have a really hard time finding. It is hard to find. I think the last few times we've gotten it, we've actually had to order it online, and it's not inexpensive. So you may end up having to order it if you want to use that. If you want to not incur that expense ordering it online, then you can always get just a base fertilizer that's already been mixed for you at the box stores. Lowe's or Home Depot carry all different garden soils. We recommend using organic garden soils, but there's a lot that you can choose from there. So I'm just going to mix this up and finish adding my fertilizer, and then we'll be right back. Okay, so I've gotten all of this mixed in really well, and one thing I don't think I remember to mention was I originally started with the peat moss and added the lime, and the reason why I always start with those is that is the most acidic part of the mix, and so we want those two mixed in really, really well and evenly distributed as we can before we add all of the other ingredients. Then I just took some of my rainwater and I've just mixed this up, and you can see it's kind of getting to the point where it'll stick a little bit to itself, and that's about what you want. It's sort of a science and an art. So you kind of get a feel for it, and you'll know in a few minutes, you'll know if you've got the right amount of wetness or not. I'll show you how you can kind of tell, but that's one way you can tell is just is it clumping together pretty well. So there's our mix. Now to start our seeds, we use a soil blocking method, and this is a soil blocker. This is the middle size. They have all different sizes, little tiny squares. I think they're 3/4 inch squares, and this is maybe an inch and a half square, and then they have even a larger square, so you can actually put the smaller blocks into a larger and larger as you're slowly transplanting up. For us, we found this works just fine, this soil blocker, the middle size for us. And the reason these are great is they make individual cubes of soil. And you probably can't tell, but on the inside there's a little indentation. So it makes an indentation in the soil block, which is a perfect place to drop your seed in. So even if you're working with really tiny seeds, it's one seed per block in each of the soil blocks. So that's what we're working with here, and I'll just show you how it works. So once you've got your soil the right amount of dampness, you're going to be able to just push this into it. This one, my table's not really strong, so I'm going to have to push it a few times. Kind of make sure it's packed in really well. On a little bit sturdier surface, I would be able to just push down really hard, and I wouldn't have to keep doing this. So it actually goes pretty fast. It can go pretty fast. The better your soil is, then the faster it goes. So you get your soil blocks pressed in, and then using a tray such as this, you can just put them in like this, and I'm going to squeeze down, and out come my soil blocks. If you can kind of see what I'm getting. Let's see if I can get one out without breaking it. So this is a soil block, and it has a little indentation in the top where I'll put the seed, And as you see, it's just lightly compacted. So it's holding its shape, but it's not hard as a rock. And it'll sit nicely in this tray, and I'll be able to make a whole line of soil blocks like this, filling up my tray, and then put the seeds in. And you can use markers, or you can do one tray per type of plant, however you want to do it. But we use these trays. Now you can get larger trays than these that have a center tray that sits inside that keeps the soil blocks up off of the ground, off of the floor of it, so that the water, they're not sitting in water. You don't want them sitting in water. But we have found those larger trays that have the little inserts are great, but they're a little bit too big for how we want to work with them. So we've switched to a tray, these smaller ones that are sturdier and easier to work with. The challenge is they have a little bit of drainage, but they don't have as much drainage as the trays that would sit in the inserts, almost like a strainer. But if you are just spraying your seeds and not just pouring water on them, they work pretty well. So what we would do is we would continue to make our soil blocks, just filling up the soil blocks this way, making sure they're pretty well compacted, cleaning off the extra soil like this, and putting it right into our tray. And when I get the tray finished, I would just go in and insert the seeds, and you can put just a little bit of soil on top of each seed or push some of the soil over. And we generally just use a spray bottle. You can put a little dome over them. That's the best way to keep the humidity in. If you don't have the domes, you can just be diligent in spraying them with a sprayer to keep them always damp. You want the seeds to stay damp all the time. If the seed dries out and then you go back and spray it, a lot of times you're going to lose that plant. It's not going to properly germinate if it dries out. So you want to always keep them damp. But you can do quite a few trays like this, and it makes it really simple. Now, the other great thing about these soil blocks is they are allowing the plant, as it starts to sprout, the roots get a lot of oxygen because it's not inside of a pot. So that makes for a stronger plant. It also makes for a lot less stress when it gets transplanted. Whereas if the roots were enclosed in a pot and we popped it out of that pot and then put it in another pot or into the ground, there's a lot of transplant stress that comes with that. And although the plant may survive, it just may never thrive the way it could have if it didn't have that stress. So these soil blocks, once the plant has sprouted, even if the roots are coming out, it can be transplanted into a pot and then into a larger pot if need be, to buy you some time until you can get it into the ground, or it can be put right into the ground. A lot of times we start ours very, very early, so we'll put them in pots first, but they won't be in the pot for very long, so the roots aren't coming all out of the bottom or getting crowded in there, so they don't have that transplanting stress. But many times it's good to just plant them right from here, and if you're doing that, you're going to have a lot less stress on that new little plant. So that's how we do soil blocking, and that's how we make our soil. We'll do another episode on composting and all that goes into that as well. But for now, at the end of this video, I'll show you the recipe that we use, where you can get some of these things, and you can also find that information on our website. So I hope this is helpful in getting your seeds started. Thanks so much for watching. Bye-bye.